more poignant moments for all of us are seeing remains being removed in these body bags. And without being indelicate, I'd like to ask if any of the rescuers, do you happen to know whether they knew any of the men whom they were removing from that scene?
I don't know about that, but the remains were in pretty bad shape, and at least while I was there, I wasn't aware of any firefighters or EMT types being removed, no.
Tim Cothran, thank you very much for bringing this video to us and for talking with us this evening. Ted?
Michelle, thank you. The intersection of so many different stories, from the rescue story to the ongoing story of what is, after all, in addition to being a terrorist attack, also one of the biggest crime stories that the world has seen. The FBI director indicated today just how seriously he and his people are taking the investigation into yesterday's acts of terrorism. 4,000 FBI agents, that's more than a third of the total force, have now been assigned to this case. Another 3,000 support personnel are assisting, many at the crime scenes in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. Joining us now from Memphis, Tennessee tonight, Weldon Kennedy. He is the former deputy director of the FBI, who was special agent in charge of the FBI's investigation into the Oklahoma City bombing. And joining us from our Washington bureau tonight, retired General Wayne Downing, who was commander-in-chief of the Joint Special Operations Command. He conducted the military's investigation into the terrorist attack on the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia. I scarcely know how to begin or where to begin, but perhaps that is the best way to start this conversation. From the FBI's point of view, how do you begin to impose order on something that by its very definition is absolute chaos?
Ted, that is extremely difficult. You start by taking one step at a time, and you see an investigation like this, as happened in Oklahoma City. You first develop one lead. That lead develops 2, 3, 4, or 5 additional leads. Each one of those develop 3, 4, or 5 additional. It's a geometric explosion of the investigation. That's precisely what happened in the Oklahoma City case, and from what I'm seeing from the news coverage is what's happening in this case. They started by finding an automobile in a parking lot at Logan Airport in Massachusetts. That has developed a number of leads. Another vehicle was located in Maine. From those leads, they were able to develop the Florida information. Now we see that over 400 agents are involved in pursuing the leads developed in Florida. And this will continue as this case grows. In Oklahoma City, similarly, within 48 hours, we similarly had thousands of FBI agents literally all over the world working leads on the case.
Is there, General Downing, at a point like this, an intersection of responsibilities between those who are investigating the crime and those, in this case the military, who would be responsible for some kind of a military reaction? In other words, are you guys in situations like this talking to each other, or is each group independently proceeding without regard to what the other is doing?
Well, I think there is some definitely some coordination, but one of the things that we've had to consider in the past is that the military does not interfere with the FBI's criminal investigation. I think in this case, you know, we get into the old argument, is a terrorist act a crime or is it an act of war? And the answer is it's both, and it depends upon how the country wants to address it. You know, we hear a lot of talk right now that this was an act of war and that war has begun. You know, I would say war has probably begun on terrorism, certainly way before this, but this event completely changes the character. Certainly the FBI is going to have to be circumspect as to how they handle evidence, how they handle information, but my experience is there's an extremely good relationship between the FBI and the CIA. They have good people swapped in each agency working the terrorist problem, and certainly I think the kind of information that the military needs and that the CIA needs in order to develop the targets that we might want to strike, I feel confident that information will flow freely. in this case.
When you talk about talk of war, it's more than just random talk of war. Sometimes we in the press are talking about war. Sometimes the public and Congress begins to talk about war. But today we have a situation where the Commander-in-Chief is referring to this as a war, where the Secretary of State, himself a former general, is talking about this as a war.
Correct.
Define for us what that means. You know, we use that term kind of loosely, and I have a fear that because many of our young people have never had the experience, that they don't know how long a war can last and that they don't know how complicated and how bloody it can get. Give us a sense of both of those things, will you?
A war implies that we're going to have a strategic aim. And just stating that and honing in on what it really means is important, and it takes some effort. And then in order to prosecute this war, we are going to have a series of campaign plans, of which the military campaign plan is just one of the campaign plans. And then in that campaign plan, you're going to have to fight a series of battles. And as I mentioned earlier with Peter Jennings, this thing, you know, is not going to be without setbacks. I mean, we're going to do things. We want to reach out. We want to strike these terrorists and whoever are supporting them. But we should not be naive that they're not going to retaliate, and they're not going to anticipate some of the things we're going to want to do. And this isn't going to be over in a month or 2 months or 6 months, but this may well take years. And so this is serious business. This is hard work. And we've got to gear up just like those emergency crews and firemen down there in the World Trade Center area. We've got to gear up just like they are for the long haul on this business.
This is where I think we have to start talking about the intersection of responsibilities between the military and the FBI and the CIA. You've already alluded to that. And Mr. Kennedy, we have been focusing, as is natural, on the investigation into who committed this crime. But the FBI, as the sort of federal police force in the United States, also has the responsibility now, and it's a heightened responsibility, of helping to protect the American people against anything further happening in the future. And we have just heard the projection that this is going to go on for months, possibly years. How is that going to change the way that the FBI does its job? And what, if anything, is the FBI going to need, perhaps even in terms of modifying or changing some of the laws that exist?
Ted, I'm not sure that it would change the method by which the FBI would pursue this investigation. I believe they will be pursuing this investigation as they would any major case, and that is take the leads, take the case wherever the facts take them. If it takes it to an international arena where there's a large number of conspirators, perhaps even some state or nation involvement, so be it. There would be a complete and total exchange of that information developed with the CIA, with the military, and of course with the government. If, on the other hand, you have the situation like in Oklahoma City, where it turned out to be 4 or 5 individuals who knew anything about the case, and there was no other involvement other than those 3 or 4 individuals. It'd be difficult to describe that as a war. If, on the other hand, this case or another one like it takes the investigation and involves many people from many nations, then you may indeed go into the war footing or the war description, as has been alluded to. But suffice it to say that the investigation will proceed in whatever direction the leads take it until there's a full development of all the facts.
What I'm asking you to talk about a little bit, and you've begun to do that, but I'd like you to take it a little bit further. The country is in pain right now. The country is hurting. The country is angry. There will be political pressure. It is all too easy for a nation that has spent more than 200 years developing its democratic freedoms to say, let's set them aside. There's nothing more important right now than finding the people responsible for this and reacting against the people who were responsible. And I would just like you to talk, because there is talk already in Congress, as you know, about the possibility of giving our intelligence agencies more power than they have had in the last few years, of perhaps giving our police forces more power than they have had in the last few years. There's always an upside and a downside to these things. Just reflect on that for a moment, would you?
Yes, there is, Ted, but this country over its history has never gone to the extent of having a national police force. I think earlier on in the program there was reference to the FBI as being a national police force. The FBI has never regarded itself in that capacity. In fact, J. Edgar Hoover and every director has maintained very publicly that the FBI is not a national police force. It does have national responsibilities, and it executes and carries out those responsibilities to the full extent that it's capable of doing, and doing very, very well. But it is not a national police force. I really don't believe that the people of this country, in spite of the anger that they now feel, which is totally justified, will throw everything out the window, all of our principles, our beliefs, and go into a complete mode of revenge and do things that are not warranted or called for by our Constitution and by the way in which we believe we conduct ourselves as a people.
General Downing, one more broad line of questioning that I'd like to engage in with you, and that is over the past 50 years, growing out of the post-World War II period and the U.S.-Soviet adversary-like relationship that existed for so many years, we were preparing for a different kind of war. We are the world's greatest nuclear power. We have the world's most powerful Air Force, the world's most powerful Navy. That's not the kind of war that we're talking about right now, is it? And I guess my question to you is, do we have the right machinery and the right strategy and the right people for fighting this kind of a war?
Well, the paradigm has changed, Ted. There's no doubt about it. I think in a lot of cases we look back 12 years to the fall of the Berlin Wall as kind of the good old days. We knew what we were up against. We had a monolithic communist enemy. We in the U.S. military were oriented on attacking the Soviet Union from 360 degrees, 24 hours a day, in as great a depth as we could, and it really gave us a focus. And when that situation fell apart, and then this, of course, the Berlin Wall fell on the 9th of November, 1989, an event I'll never forget, and followed very closely within about a year with the collapse of the Soviet Union. This entire model shifted, and we all of us, I think, breathed a deep sigh, saying, well, now finally we're going to get a peace dividend, we can reorient ourselves. We very quickly found ourselves involved in a war out there in the desert in Iraq, where we achieved a stunning victory. And of course, we displayed to the world our capabilities and our competence. And I think we told any enemy that if they were going to take us on, that was not the way to do it. And then from this arose this concept of an asymmetric threat. People not going after our strengths, not confronting us in areas where we could put our strengths against them, but attacking us in ways where we were not strong, where we had weaknesses. And I think what we saw yesterday was an ultimate manifestation, beyond, I think, what any of us dreamed possible, where we had a terrorist group attack us with what can only be called weapons of mass destruction because of the incredible amount of not only casualties, but who could have foreseen that they could drop the Twin Towers? I mean, I couldn't. I couldn't see that they could do that. And so what we see now is an enemy demonstrating that they can attack us in ways which, while we have been prepared, we've talked a lot about it, we've done a lot of studies on it, in the last just 3 or 4 years, we haven't taken some of those real tough steps to prepare ourselves for this new world and this new threat. And why haven't we, Ted?
How do you... Well, forgive me, and yeah. I'm going to keep pointing out during the evening there's a little bit of a time delay between London and back there in the United States, so it's sometimes we step on each other a little bit, and I apologize to you for doing that. How do you fight a war